The 5-year-old girl had no idea that sharing her bread would bring an entire tribe to their knees the next morning. But as little Lily Clark stepped toward the silent native child crouched behind the wooden barrels, clutching her small meal, she was about to set in motion something that would change 2 worlds forever. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street when Lily first spotted her. A thin figure, no older than herself, with long black hair that hung like a curtain around her face. The child sat motionless behind the supply barrels outside Clark's general store, her dark eyes watching the townspeople pass by without a single word or gesture. Most folks hurried past, their eyes deliberately avoiding the small, still form. Lily had been helping her mother Sarah arrange the new fabric bolts when the sight stopped her cold. The native girl's clothes were patched and worn, her feet bare against the rough wooden planks. But it was the way she held herself that made Lily's chest tighten with something she couldn't name yet. The child seemed to be trying to disappear, to become as invisible as the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Without thinking, Lily clutched the thick slice of bread and cheese her mother had given her for lunch. Her small fingers wrapped around the food as she watched the girl's eyes track a woman carrying fresh baked pies from the bakery. The longing in that silent gaze was unmistakable, even to a 5-year-old. Her father Samuel emerged from behind the counter, his heavy boots announcing his presence. When he spotted the native child, his expression hardened. "Lily, come inside. That one doesn't belong here." But Lily couldn't move. She stood frozen, watching the girl who seemed to be holding her breath, waiting for the inevitable command to leave. The child's hands were pressed flat against her stomach, and Lily recognized that gesture. She'd seen it before when her own belly ached from hunger during the long winter months when supplies ran low. The girl's eyes met Lily's for just a moment, and in that brief connection, something passed between them that neither could understand, but both could feel. Fear mixed with hope in those dark depths, and Lily felt her heart squeeze tight in her chest. Her mother appeared in the doorway, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. "Samuel, what's wrong?" Sarah's voice carried a note of concern as she followed her husband's stern gaze. The native child began to rise, clearly preparing to flee from the growing attention. Her movements were careful and quiet, like a deer sensing danger. But as she gathered her thin shawl around her shoulders, Lily made a decision that would echo through both communities for generations to come. She stepped forward, her small bare feet silent on the wooden boards, and extended her meal toward the girl. "Are you hungry?" The simple question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Samuel's sharp intake of breath was audible, and Sarah's hand flew to her throat. The native child froze completely, her eyes wide with something between terror and disbelief. But what happened next would prove that some gestures transcend all the fear and misunderstanding that adults build between different worlds. And by tomorrow morning, the tribal elders would arrive with something that would leave the entire town speechless. The native child stared at the offered bread, as if it might vanish like morning mist. Her thin fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't reach for the food. Instead, her dark eyes darted nervously between Lily's innocent face and the 2 adults who stood frozen in the doorway behind her. Samuel stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Lily, step back, now." But his daughter didn't move. She continued holding out the bread and cheese, her blue eyes fixed on the hungry girl before her. "Mama made extra. You can have mine." The native child's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak, but no sound emerged. She had been silent for so long that some in town whispered she couldn't speak at all. Her gaze dropped to the food again, and Lily could see the war playing out across her features, desperate hunger battling against deep-rooted caution. Sarah moved closer, her maternal instincts overriding her husband's disapproval. She knelt beside Lily, studying the thin child who seemed to be shrinking into herself. "What's your name, sweetheart?" For a long moment, only the sound of wind whistling through the wooden buildings filled the silence. Then, barely above a whisper, the girl spoke her first words anyone in town had ever heard. "Ayanna." The name carried the melody of a different language, flowing like water over stones. Lily repeated it carefully, testing the sounds on her tongue. "Ayanna, that's pretty." Samuel's expression softened despite himself. He had never heard the child speak before, and something about the moment gave him pause. Still, years of tension between the town and the nearby tribal community weighed heavily on his shoulders. Ayanna's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, a sound that made Lily's decision even more certain. She placed the food on the barrel beside the girl and stepped back, giving her space. "It's really good. Mama makes the best bread." with movements as careful as a wild animal approaching water. Ayanna reached for the offering. Her fingers closed around the bread, and she brought it to her lips with reverence that spoke of too many hungry days. The first bite seemed to surprise her with its taste, and tears gathered in her dark eyes. "She's just a little girl," Sarah whispered to her husband, her own voice thick with emotion. Samuel watched as his daughter settled onto the wooden planks beside Ayanna, chattering softly about the different types of bread her mother baked. The native child listened intently while eating, nodding occasionally, but still not speaking beyond that single shared name. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, neither Samuel nor Sarah noticed the figure watching from the ridge beyond town. An elderly native man sat motionless on his horse, observing the unprecedented scene unfolding outside the general store. What he witnessed there would carry him back to his people with news that would change everything. Because by dawn, the tribal council would make a decision that would test whether kindness could truly bridge the chasm between two worlds that had learned to fear each other. The next morning arrived with an unusual stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Lily woke before dawn, her small hands pressed against the window as she searched the empty barrels where Ayanna had sat the day before. The space looked hollow without the quiet girl who had shared her bread and listened to her stories about the different clouds in the sky. Samuel was already dressed and moving about the store when a sound made him freeze at the counter. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but grew into something rhythmic and purposeful. He stepped outside and felt his breath catch in his throat. Coming down the main street was a procession unlike anything the town had ever seen. Chief Running Bear led the group, his weathered face serious but not hostile. Behind him rode 12 tribal elders, their horses moving in perfect unison. But it was what they carried that made Samuel's pulse quicken with uncertainty. Each rider bore gifts, hand-woven blankets in colors that seemed to capture the essence of sunset, carved wooden items that gleamed with careful craftsmanship, pottery painted with designs that told stories older than the town itself. And at the center of the procession, carried by 2 men walking alongside the horses, was something that made Samuel step back involuntarily. Sarah appeared beside her husband, Lily clutching her mother's skirt as she peered around to see what was happening. "Samuel, what do they want?" The procession stopped directly in front of Clark's general store. Chief Running Bear dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent decades in the saddle. His dark eyes found Samuel's face, and for a moment, the 2 men simply studied each other across the years of mistrust that had separated their communities. "My people come in peace," the chief said, his English careful but clear. "We bring honor to your daughter." Lily stepped forward before her parents could stop her, her blue eyes wide with wonder at the beautiful items the tribal members carried. "Did you come to see Ayanna?" Chief Running Bear's stern expression softened as he looked down at the small girl. "Ayanna is my granddaughter. Yesterday she spoke for the first time in many moons. She told us of the white child who shared her food and treated her as family." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. All this time, they had assumed the silent child was an orphan, perhaps abandoned or lost. The reality that she belonged to the tribal leader himself changed everything about what had happened the day before. Sarah's hand found her husband's arm, squeezing gently as understanding dawned. Lily had not just fed a hungry child, she had shown kindness to the granddaughter of the most powerful man in the entire territory. But what the chief would reveal next about why Ayanna had been silent, and what the tribe had brought in return for one little girl's compassion, would prove that some moments are destined to reshape the future of everyone involved. Chief Running Bear's weathered hands gestured toward the gifts his people had brought, but his eyes remained fixed on Lily's upturned face. Ayanna lost her voice when her parents crossed to the spirit world last winter. The medicine men said her words had followed them beyond the stars. Sarah's breath hitched audibly, and Samuel felt his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. The image of the silent child suddenly took on new meaning, grief so profound it had stolen her ability to speak. "But yesterday," the chief continued, his voice carrying the weight of profound gratitude, "she came home speaking of blue eyes filled with kindness. She told us how your daughter sat beside her, shared food and stories, and made her feel seen again." He paused, studying Lily with something approaching reverence. "She said your child's heart was so pure, it called her voice back from the place where the dead dwell." Lily stepped closer to the chief, her small hand reaching out to touch one of the intricate blankets. "Is Ayanna better now? Will she come back?" The tribal leader's stern features cracked into the first smile Samuel had ever seen from him. "She is with the elders now, learning to use her returned voice. She speaks of nothing but the golden-haired girl who showed her that kindness exists in this world. One of the elders moved forward, carrying an item that made the gathering crowd gasp in recognition. It was a war shield, but unlike any weapon of conflict. The leather surface was painted with symbols that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. And at its center was the image of two children, one with flowing blonde hair, one with dark braids, their hands clasped together. "This belonged to my father, and his father before him," Chief Running Bear explained. "It has protected our family through generations of battles. Today we give it to your daughter, not as a weapon, but as a promise." Samuel's throat felt thick as he struggled to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "Chief, we cannot accept something so valuable. Lily was just being kind. Any child would have—" "No." The chief's voice was firm but not unkind. "Not any child. Most of your people cross the street when they see my granddaughter. They whisper that she brings bad spirits because she does not speak. Your daughter saw only another child who needed help." The crowd that had gathered was growing larger, townspeople emerging from shops and homes to witness the unprecedented scene. Among them, Samuel noticed faces he recognized, people who had indeed crossed streets to avoid the quiet native girl, who had whispered about curses and bad omens. Lily looked up at her father, confusion clear in her innocent features. "Papa, why wouldn't people help Ayanna? She's just hungry and sad." The question hung in the morning air like smoke, challenging every adult present to examine their own hearts. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, tears threatening to spill over as she realized how naturally kindness had come to her child, unfiltered by the fears and prejudices that had shaped the adults around her. Chief Running Bear lifted the ceremonial shield, and Samuel saw that his hands trembled slightly with emotion. "This shield will hang in your home as a symbol. When my people see it, they will know this family is friends. When your people see it, they will remember that one small act of love can change the course of rivers." But what happened next would prove that the chief's gifts were only the beginning of a transformation that would reach far beyond one family, one town, or even one moment of childhood innocence. As Chief Running Bear prepared to present the shield to Lily, a commotion erupted from the edge of the crowd. Tom Bradley, the town's self-appointed spokesman and owner of the largest ranch, pushed through the gathering with several other prominent citizens behind him. "Now hold on just a minute." Bradley's voice cut through the reverent atmosphere like a blade. "We appreciate the gesture, Chief, but we can't have this kind of arrangement setting a precedent." Samuel felt his jaw clench as he recognized the faces behind Bradley, men who had spent years building walls between the communities, who profited from the fear and separation that kept everyone isolated. These were the same people who had warned him about letting those people too close to his business. Chief Running Bear's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. The other tribal elders moved their horses slightly closer, creating a protective semicircle around their leader. The gifts they carried suddenly seemed less like offerings and more like shields of their own. "My daughter showed kindness to a child," Samuel found himself saying, surprised by the strength in his own voice. "I won't apologize for that." Bradley's face reddened. "Samuel, think about what you're doing. Your store serves everyone in this territory. You start taking sides, playing favorites with the tribes, and you'll lose customers. Good Christian customers who've supported your family for years." Lily looked between the adults, confusion clouding her innocent features. She tugged on her mother's skirt. "Mama, why is that man angry?" Ayanna was hungry. The simple question seemed to strike the crowd like lightning. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, drawing strength from the child's unwavering moral clarity. "Some people forget that kindness doesn't have conditions, sweetheart." One of the tribal elders spoke quietly to Chief Running Bear in their native language. The chief nodded gravely, then addressed the crowd in English. "We have watched your town for many seasons. We know which among you cross streets to avoid our children, which of you speak poison about our ways, which of you would see us disappear entirely." His gaze swept over Bradley and his supporters with uncomfortable accuracy. "But yesterday, one small girl reminded us that hatred is not born in children's hearts. It is taught by those who have forgotten their own capacity for love." The chief stepped forward and gently took Lily's small hands in his weathered ones. "Little one, will you accept the friendship of my people?" Before anyone could object, Lily nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir, and tell Ayanna she can have my lunch anytime she wants." The chief's eyes glistened as he lifted the ceremonial shield, but as he prepared to place it in Lily's hands, Bradley made a move that would force everyone present to choose sides in a conflict that had been brewing for generations. You hang that thing in your store, Samuel, and don't expect to see another dollar from decent folks, Bradley threatened, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. What Samuel Clark decided in that moment would determine not just his family's future, but whether fear or love would guide the destiny of an entire community. Samuel Clark stood at the crossroads of everything he had ever believed about safety, survival, and what it meant to be a good man. Bradley's threat hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire, promising to burn down everything Samuel had built if he chose wrong. He looked down at Lily, who was still holding the chief's weathered hands with complete trust. His daughter had no idea that her simple act of sharing bread could cost their family everything: their store, their livelihood, their place in the community that had been their home for 5 years. Sarah moved to stand beside her husband, her presence a silent declaration of support. She had watched the fear in people's eyes when they spoke of the native tribes, had heard the whispered warnings about getting too close, too friendly. But she had also seen her daughter's pure heart in action, and something inside her refused to let that innocence be poisoned by adult prejudices. "You're making a mistake, Samuel," Bradley pressed, sensing hesitation. "Your family depends on this store. Think about Lily's future. You want her growing up poor because you couldn't see past one moment of childhood foolishness?" The word struck deep, finding every father's worst fear. Samuel felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him as he looked around at the faces in the crowd. Some showed support, but others revealed the same fear and disapproval that Bradley voiced. These were his customers, his neighbors, the people who had welcomed his family when they first arrived. Chief Running Bear watched the internal battle playing out on Samuel's face with understanding that spoke of his own difficult choices. "We will not force friendship where it is not wanted," he said quietly. "If your people prefer the old ways, we will respect that." But as the chief began to lower the shield, something remarkable happened. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly schoolteacher who had been silent until now, stepped forward from the crowd. "Tom Bradley, you don't speak for all of us," she said firmly. "I've taught children from this town for 30 years, and I've never seen anything more beautiful than what that little girl did yesterday." She turned to Lily with tears in her eyes. "Honey, you showed us all what real courage looks like." Her words seemed to unlock something in the crowd. One by one, other voices began to rise. The baker's wife spoke of how Ayanna had never caused trouble, just sat quietly hoping for kindness. A young father mentioned how his own son had asked why the native girl always looked so sad. Samuel felt the shift happening around him, but Bradley wasn't finished. "Fine words won't put food on your tables when the tribal conflicts come. You think being friendly will protect you when tensions rise? You're all fools if you believe that." The chief's eyes flashed with something dangerous, and Samuel realized they were approaching a point where this could spiral beyond anyone's control. One wrong word, one misinterpreted gesture, and the fragile moment could shatter into the kind of violence that would haunt both communities for generations. In that critical instant, Samuel Clark made the decision that would define not just his family's legacy, but the future of everyone watching. He stepped forward and placed his hands on the ceremonial shield alongside Chief Running Bear's. "My daughter taught me something yesterday," Samuel said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "She taught me that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is the right thing, and sometimes that's exactly why you have to do it." What happened next would prove that courage, like kindness, can be contagious when someone is brave enough to take the first step. The ceremonial shield felt heavier than Samuel had expected as he and Chief Running Bear lowered it into Lily's small hands together. The moment their fingers released it, something profound shifted in the air around them, as if the very atmosphere recognized the significance of what had just occurred. Bradley shook his head in disgust and turned to leave, but his predicted exodus of supporters didn't materialize. Instead, more townspeople stepped forward, drawn by something they couldn't quite name but couldn't resist. Mrs. Henderson placed her weathered hand on Lily's shoulder in a gesture of protection and pride. "Thank you," Chief Running Bear said to Samuel, his voice thick with emotion that had been building for years. "You have given my granddaughter something more precious than safety. You have given her hope that different peoples can see past their fears." As if summoned by his words, a small figure appeared at the edge of the tribal procession. Ayanna approached slowly, her dark eyes bright with newfound confidence. When she reached Lily, she spoke clearly for all to hear. My grandfather told me your name means, like a lily flower, Ayana said, her voice stronger than anyone had ever heard it. In our language, my name means eternal blossom. Maybe that means we were supposed to be friends. Lily beamed and carefully shifted the shield to one arm so she could take Ayana's hand. Will you help me understand what all the symbols mean? The sight of the two children, one blonde and one dark-haired, examining the ancient shield together while their communities watched in wonder, created a moment that would be remembered and retold for generations. Samuel felt tears he didn't know he'd been holding finally spill over as he realized what his daughter had accomplished. Chief Running Bear gestured to his people, and they began distributing the gifts they had brought. Blankets for families who had shown kindness in small ways over the years. Carved items for those who had never turned away when Ayana appeared. Food for anyone willing to share a meal across cultural lines. Sarah found herself accepting a beautiful woven basket from one of the tribal women, who smiled and said, "Your daughter's heart calls to our hearts. This is how peace begins." As the morning sun climbed higher, the formal ceremony gave way to something more natural and organic. Children from both communities began to gather around Lily and Ayana, curiosity overcoming the fears their parents had tried to instill. Adults found themselves in conversations they never thought possible, discovering that common ground existed in places they had never thought to look. The shield now hung proudly in the window of Clark's general store, where it would remain for decades to come. Travelers would ask about its significance, and Samuel would tell them the story of his 5-year-old daughter, who changed 2 worlds with a piece of bread and an open heart. Bradley lost some customers that day, but Samuel gained something more valuable than money. The knowledge that when faced with the choice between profit and principle, he had chosen to follow his daughter's example of fearless love. Years later, when historians would write about the peaceful coexistence that developed between the town and the tribal community, they would trace it back to this single morning. But those who were there would always remember it differently, not as a political moment or a cultural milestone, but as the day a little girl proved that kindness needs no translation, and that courage often comes in the smallest packages. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where compassion and bravery meet in the untamed frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.